John, we are again honored yesterday. I have probably never in my life been able the privilege of leading an event on this subject that was so beautifully framed as yesterday. And I think the best thing any of us can do is probably listen to that talk again 10 times in the next year. It was just so extraordinarily helpful. We are so grateful. I suspect most people in this place have been influenced over the years, either directly by your preaching, your books, podcasts, whatever, or indirectly through those who have. And so we want you to know that we owe you a debt of gratitude for your faithful service, and we are so grateful to you for that. For those of you, yes, indeed. By way of broad introduction, tell us about yourself, your journey to faith, a short biography, and actually what you're doing now. So give us
I don't remember being converted, which I am happy with, because I think we learn the wonder of conversion not primarily through remembered experiences, but through the Word of God. I think if you think you have a handle on the majesty and magnificence and wonder of your conversion because you remember it and how glorious the transition was, you don't know a fraction of it. Because you can't know the miracle without being told by God what happened there. So, my mother told me that when I was 6, in a motel in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, I became convicted of my sin and asked her what I could do, and she knelt with me by the bed in the motel room and led me in a prayer of confession of my sin and faith in Jesus, and I don't remember any of that. And so it doesn't matter to me whether that's a true story or not. What matters to me is that today I see. When I began to see is not of the essence. Once upon a time, the devil was blinding the minds of an unbeliever. And God said, let there be light, 2 Corinthians 4, verse 6. He said, let there be light. And whether a 6-year-old or a 14-year-old or a 23-year-old discovering God's centeredness was the first seeing doesn't matter much to me. What matters to me is that I see by grace. So, I'm not sure what the pilgrimage was. I never remember being an unbeliever. And I'm thankful for that. I never remember rebelling against my parents. I think one of the most helpful things for me to say here in this context would be that my father would have self-identified as a fundamentalist of the good old Southern American variety, and you would think that a fellow like me would grow up and kick against the standards that were used, and I never did. And I've tried to figure out why that is, because I know a lot of people who grew up in homes sort of like mine who did kick, rebel, leave, and never come back. But I think one of the means God used to keep that from happening was that my father was the happiest man I've ever known. He and my mother would sing in the front seat of our old Buick, driving from Greenville, South Carolina to Daytona Beach for our annual 10-day beach vacation, and my sister and I in the back seat listening to my mother and father sing gospel choruses. I mean, that's extraordinary. That's extraordinary. And not only did he sing, but when he came back from evangelistic crusades, he was an evangelist, he would come back with stories of triumph about the gospel and a new joke. And he laughed harder at his own jokes than anybody. And my mother laughed next hardest until the tears would roll down her cheek. And my sister and I would sit there looking at each end of the table thinking, I think they're having a good time enjoying Jesus. Why would anybody want to go to a movie or dance or smoke? I mean, I just never kicked because I lived in a glorious family. So that brings me to, where do I go from there?
You went to college then? And tell us.
Yeah. Okay, off to Wheaton College, literature major, met Noel Henry on an auspicious date, 6/6/66. We just celebrated our 53rd 6/6/66. Straightway got mono and was in the hospital for 3 weeks and decided not to be a medical doctor but to go to seminary because I was listening to John Harold Ockengay preach 200 yards away in the Wheaton Chapel. And as I lay there with my big yellow tonsils and my palpitating spleen, said to myself, I'd give anything to do what he's doing right now. Opening the Word of God. I said, that's glorious. And so my girlfriend had fallen into love with a pre-med student, and so I did a bait and switch on her and said, I think I'm going to go to seminary, not medical school. And she was okay with that. So we went to Fuller Seminary and had the most influential teacher of my life there, Daniel Fuller, who did two things. He showed me a magnificent view of a sovereign God, especially through the lens of Jonathan Edwards. And then he gave me an exegetical method called arcing, which takes every word, every phrase, every sentence of the Bible with blood-earnest seriousness and wrings it until every drop of life-giving blood falls out of it on the page. And I've never been the same since. That's why I talked last night about being 23 years old, because I was 22 when I went there, and by the time I was 23, I was a different human being. And Noel was walking on that pilgrimage with me. Then I went to Germany for 3 years and got a degree in New Testament. Then I taught for 6 years at Bethel College in St. Paul, Minnesota, taught Bible and Greek. And then God stepped into my life in a most remarkable way on October 14th, 1979. I mean, Pascal, I don't know if you've ever read Pascal's conversion story, but he carried all of his life long until his grave. He carried inside his coat, sewn into his coat, a piece of paper where he'd written down, and I don't remember the date, but he put down the date, midnight, fire, and met God. And I didn't meet God, but I met a call to preaching that was, at that point, irresistible. Waited for Noel to wake up the next morning thinking, okay, this is another bait and switch here, because being a teacher is cool, you know, Mr. Academics, and no big pressure on the wife if you're a professor, but if you become a pastor, whoa, this is big for both of you. And so I'm lying there at 6:30 in the morning, having been up half the night wrestling with God and thinking, she's got to say yes, because if she doesn't say yes, we're in big trouble, because God just spoke. But you don't go off without your wife, right? You two have become one flesh. And I leaned over when she got up and said, what would you think if I resigned at Bethel and looked for a church? And she said, I could see that coming. And what she meant was a couple of years of watching me in church. And if it was a mediocre sermon, I'd say, we got to do better than that. And if it was a great sermon, I would say, I would love to do that. So I went to my denomination and said, I'm available. Find me a church, help me. And they sent me to Bethlehem, and I was there for 33 years until 2013. So 2013, stepped away, not because I was tired of preaching, but because the church was big and complex and prosperous, and I think I had Peter principled myself out of a job. I mean, it's a big church. It's complicated. It had 3 campuses, 125 employees, and 20 pastors, and 40 elders. And I just thought, oh my goodness, this is just over my managerial head. And so while I still had energy in life, God did a miracle. There's a lot of people here in this room right now who go to Bethlehem, and they will remember what a miracle he did of bringing in a man named Jason Meyer, and the church voted in a closed ballot. These are Baptists now. Remember, these are Baptists. They don't agree on anything.
I think these guys, we've heard of Baptists.
Yeah, and I think out of 890 votes or something like that, there were 7 no votes on a closed ballot, and so he was in tears, and we were all thrilled that God had found a person. And so I stepped away from. I still go to the church, love it, every minute of it, love corporate worship like crazy. We'll go there sooner or later. But Matthew Westerholm is the downtown Chuck, who's here. Maybe, I don't know his.
Yeah, by the way, could the Bethlehem people, if there's any here, put their hands up? Are them here? We got a whole bunch.
There's a couple over
some
there.
Bethlehem Baptists. They've come. And where's Chuck Stedham? Chuck Stedham, stand up. Where is he? There's Chuck Stedham at the back. Chuck, while you're standing up, standing up. Chuck? Would you mind being on the panel later? Yeah. I asked.
No, I wouldn't mind.
I knew if I asked you privately, you'd say no. So I thought I'd ask you in front of everybody. And then you had to say yes, so it's good.
Chuck leads the worship at the South Campus now. He and I were together for 17 years or so, almost 20 years working together. So Chuck and I go way back on the kind of things you care about here, he cares about, and I care about. So I was there for 33 years, and now I attend there, enjoy it, revel in the Sunday morning, and I'm here.
Let's go to that, because for the last 12 years, I kind of, with the itinerant part of what we do, one of the things ways Kristyn and I have survived is it's having a good friend in every city. So of course, when we come to your city, Chuck and I always get together and we go for some food. I think our first time was 12 years ago, and we've been doing it ever since. And one of the things Chuck said, one of the first things he ever said to me about you was that wherever you are in the world, whatever the occasion, whatever the project, whatever the controversy, whatever it is, that you always looked forward to coming back to singing with God's family on a Sunday, and you relish that. Talk to us about that and why it's so important as a senior pastor that you love singing with your people.
Yeah, that's really true. It's still true, and it was true for my children. We took vacations, and they'd say, "When can we go back to Bethlehem?" I mean, that's a gift. When your kids want to go back to the church you pastor. I mean, a lot of pastors have such embattled experiences. The kids, they just like to get away. But anyway, that's another story for another conference, I suppose.
We can do a second hour if you want. So. We got 1 or 2 questions about parenting. We'll come back.
The reasons that corporate worship, singing, praying, responsive readings, confessing our sins, preaching, is so uniquely powerful. I want to use a superlative here. That's risky because God shows up superlatively in one-on-one moments and you yourself alone with him moments, and any one of those can be exquisite power. But on the whole, I would say my sweetest communion with God happens with Chuck. I mean, Chuck is a symbol when I say that. I don't mean, but he was the leader in those moments. And so what I mean is corporate worship singing. Now, why is it? I've tried to, it just is. It just is. I think it is because I was made for this, and you were too. You may be resisting it for all kinds of reasons, but you were made to see and savor God with his people in the manifold ways of corporate worship. That's what you were made for. And therefore, when you are experiencing it, you are experiencing something of the end for which you were made. And that's deeply satisfying. So that's one reason. Here's the second one that I've watched in myself. Corporate worship becomes not only an awakening of affections that I did not bring into the service. I'm coming there to feed on what God is doing in that moment, on the truth there and on the beauty of our songs. So I'm being awakened to be who I am, being awakened to know God, love God, delight in God, be satisfied in God by song and the truth of the songs and the beauty of the songs. There's something about profound biblical truth about God mingled with beautiful tunes that is uniquely effective in the soul of a human being. It's unique. It just is. And so that happens. Here's the third thing. I can remember moments. Here's Tom Steller, who was with me for 33 years, to my left. And Tom was saved in the Jesus People movement. He's been a hand lifter from the day one. I had to be converted because I grew up in you know what. And so I'm sitting there singing, going through the motions because that's what happens. You just lose. It doesn't always click, right? You're just going through the motions. And my eyes glance over, and Tom is like this. That very posture, knowing what I know about Tom, was like an arrow repeatedly for my soul. That's corporateness. That's corporateness. Me being near somebody who's engaged with God is convicting, right? If you're near somebody who's really authentically not putting on any show, they're just engaged, they're loving God in their relationship with God, and you're not, that's good for you to see. So that's another piece of it. Here's the one that I probably remember most poignantly. I mean, everybody thinks, oh, yeah, you've been married for 50 years, cool, got 5 kids, you're still married, must be wonderful. We've walked through such deep waters together, Noelle and I. Struggled with so many things. Kid problems and marital problems, in and out of counseling maybe for 33 months total over our 50 years, and trying to love each other better, not hurt each other with what we do or say. And so I'm a pastor, right? We're talking about 33 years of sitting on the front pew with about 500 or 600, 700 people behind me, and I'm going to preach in a few minutes, and I'm singing, and this is the worst week of our marriage, right? What do you do? How do you carry on? How do you not be a hypocrite? And I cannot tell you, Chuck, and all you singers, how many times some beautiful expression of the mercies of God broke over me with such conviction of my selfishness. I stayed married. I felt hope again. I think I can go home and say, I'm sorry. I mean, where do you get the strength? I'm talking about the guys right now, okay? Same issue with the ego with the women, but it's a little different with the guys. Where do you get the strength to just humble yourself and say, I was wrong, I'm sorry? Or even if you don't think you were wrong, to say something sweetly conciliatory, because that's your job. I get it on the front pew in the middle of, I mean, we weren't singing His Mercy is More in those days, but it would do it today. It would do it today. So that's another another piece, and maybe one last reason why I exist. When I'm a pastor, I exist to create a God-loving people. That's why I exist. My preaching is designed to build truth about God into the mind and affections for God into the heart. That's why I exist. That's my whole life. In corporate worship, I can hear it happening. Right? I mean, even now, I know, hundreds of people have come to Bethlehem since I left in 2013. Half the people downtown don't know me. I'm sitting there as the 33-year veteran, and they don't know me. That's awesome. That's glorious. But I also know half of these people were under my ministry, so that when I'm 4 pews up from the back on the left-hand side under the balcony with Noel in our little spot, and 15 people around me that I can recognize and know have their hands in the air at some magnificent climax of a hymn to God's glory, I feel I didn't live in vain. So those are a few reasons why those moments. Well, one more. I got cancer. I got pancreatic cancer in, this is really funny. The biopsy was on our anniversary. December 21, 2005. The surgery to take out the prostate gland was on Valentine's Day. Oh, that's great. Between December 21 and February 14, those were the sweetest corporate worship experiences of my life. Because I didn't know I was going to live. It's wonderful to get a cancer diagnosis and still live. Everybody should get that opportunity. Otherwise, we take so much for granted. So, standing on at the front pew, for those, what's that, about 8 weeks or so, every Sunday was more intense than ever, and it was glorious. If that was, to me, a foretaste of what it would be like to get ready to die when the cancer's not going to be healed anymore, that's okay. That will be okay.
Thank you for that answer, John. It's just so many things, so many thoughts swirling in my head, not least of all, as each of us just pause for maybe 20 seconds even, just to think about all the people we will lead in Sunday in worship, whether we're the pastor, whether we're the worship leader, whether we've another role, and just think about that story compounded 80, 20, 50, 100, 200, 500 times in a Sunday. Just the huge importance of singing and what we sing on a Sunday, and the people and the real lives. C.S. Lewis famously said it wasn't the great architecture or symphonies that was eternal, it was the person beside us in the bus, and it's the person beside us in the pew, and what a privilege to serve those people. Let's go a little different place for a minute. Each person at the conference is getting this book, Expository Exaltation. I made the joke yesterday. I was reading Desiring God on the Lawrence Dunbar ferry, to the point that every time I see the book, I still smell, that sea water, then that kind of smell of the boat. But every time I see the book Desiring God, I still have that smell in my nostrils. It's really weird. But as I said, it was a unique eye-opener for me, because it was both this rich biblical doctrine, but it was just, there was so much of the emotions, the affections, the passion and the outworking of it. I've always come alive with Charles Wesley's lyrics, because I think they explode theology in a way that opens all the affections. Stuart Townend does the same thing, and this book did that for me. Talk to us about expository exaltation and preaching and worship, and take it away.
If the goal of life, worship, preaching is a people alive to God, knowing God truly, loving Him duly, And the fact that those rhyme says something. I work at sentences like that. I sit for half an hour trying to think how to say new things. I mean, that one will get old. It gets old. It's already old to me. Love God truly, or know him truly, love him duly. It's old to me. It might not be old to you, but I work at things like that. But that's another topic. If that's the goal, my people need to know God. And my people need to have passions for God so that they have more satisfaction in God than food or sex or money or sports or media. If they're idolaters if they don't. And that's my job. So if that's your job, Pastor, what are you going to do? Both of those are impossible. The devil is blinding their minds and their hearts is hard as stone. You can't do anything about that in yourself. So preaching is an impossible task, has an impossible goal. Miracles have to abound in this room if anything eternal is going to happen. So what do you do? And those two words, expository exaltation, with a U, not an A, not exaltation, but exaltation. One is transitive, one's intransitive. Remember those words from grammar? No. What do they teach in school these days? C.S. Lewis said. Those two words capture those two goals. Expository means my job is to see what God has revealed of himself in this book. See how he revealed it in the very words, phrases, sentences, paragraphs, and then to find words and structures of thought to so teach it. Elders must be apt to teach, didaktikos. Be really good to meditate on what that adjective means. They must be apt to teach so that when he's done, understanding has happened. Light has gone in the mind, and they are better aware of the reality of God in their minds. I mean, here's a little, I don't know where you are on this, but a couple of things about how knowledge relates to worship. I've watched some people who are so disinclined to theology, so inclined to mystery, that they try to make God look greater by highlighting what we can't know because he's so great. I think, let me think about that. When I read the Bible, which is a very thick book, like mine has, 1,200 pages in it? No, 1,060 pages roughly in this book. This is not written so that you will praise God for how little you know of him. It's not. I just know it's not. God did not waste so many people's time putting so much glorious truth about himself in this book for us to say so little of it, know so little of it, and justify our ignorance by wonders of mystery. Baloney. The way you come to appreciate mystery is by climbing to the top of the highest mountain you can find and looking over it and seeing, oh, there's another range out there. And then climbing that one and looking over the top and saying, oh, there's another range out there. And then climbing over that one. That's called theology. Those mountain ranges are learning about God from the book. So that's my first beef with those who try to create worship out of not knowing. Here's another one. God cannot be glorified by being trusted without reason. So many people extol leaps. Like leap, just leap into the dark. Well, if a man walks up to you on the street and gives you a bag, you don't know him from Adam, and he gives you a bag and he says, there's $10,000 in cash in here. Would you go deposit it at my bank? Here's my bank number. Here's my PIN. the account number. Here's everything you need, and I'll see you later. And you look at him and say, I don't even know you. Why would you trust me with this? And he says, I just do. Would you think he's a wonderful person? He's an idiot. And God would say he's an idiot. However, if when you say, I don't even know you, he says, well, I know you. I've been watching you at work. I work down the hall. I've tested you. I've seen everything you do. You're a man of great integrity. You put this in the bank. I know you will. Now how do you feel? He's not an idiot. He's done his research. He knows you. He's honoring you. That's the way God wants to be honored. This book has in it countless reasons for trusting God. Countless reasons for trusting God. If you try to make much of God without reasons to make much of God, he's not honored. You're an idiot. So that's another beef I have with people who say leap in the dark. Now, what question are we trying to answer? Remind me again.
Expository exaltation.
So I'm on expository. Let me just shift gears for just a minute and you ask me another question. I'm sorry, talking too long. So you want people to be knowing God, truly loving him duly. Well, stocking their minds with ideas is not sufficient for awakening love, affections. How does that happen? It's a miracle. I said to Chuck early on, and I've said it all along, we don't worship and then preach. We worship with singing, and then we worship with preaching. You and I are doing the same thing. I'm using preaching, you're using singing, and we're both worshiping. Now, so what does it mean for a pastor to worship as he preaches? Telling the truth is half of it. Making it visible and plain from the Bible is half of it. But if he's not responding with his heart to what he's seen here, he's not preaching, and he's not worshiping. There got to be evidences in that man's voice, in that man's eyes, in that man's demeanor. He believes this. He loves this. He's afraid of this. He's amazed at this. Whatever the proper emotions are for this particular psalm or text in Romans, whatever those particular appropriate responses of the heart are, he should have them. And that's exaltation. Expository exaltation. So really, expository exaltation is an effort to see preaching as an embodiment of what you want out there in the people. What you want in the people is people who know God rightly and then feel deeply about what they know about him, or feel appropriately. If it's hell, you want them to feel the horror of it. If it's lostness, you want them to feel the grief of it. If it's heaven, you want them to feel the hope of it. If it's a great gift, you want them to feel thankfulness for it. If it's some horrible sin they've committed, you want them to feel broken for it. All those feelings are worship. That's what matters. And you've got to embody that, preach that, and then if God please, it happens in people.
Thank you, so helpful. We've little time left, so let's move to a few practical things. One of my dinners with Chuck in Minneapolis, I said to him, what was it like interviewing for John Piper? And he said it was the one thing that struck him was that you didn't speak that much, but you said, I want the sound of my sound of my church's music to be the sound of God's people singing. Can you help that?
Chuck came to us at a critical moment of re-identifying who we are. So we had a moral failure on the staff. It was cataclysmic. We lost 230 people. The controversy was enormous in the church. It was so interwoven with music and worship issues. And we took about 3 years. We did not grow. I mean, if you're in a season of non-growth, I've known 8 seasons of non-growth in 33 years. I can graph the growth of Bethlehem. People look at, if they look at your ministry as a whole and your church is bigger at the end than it was at the beginning, they say success. Oh my goodness, is that ever oversimplified? I mean, you graph this as, well, we were in one of those awful dips, and we didn't go after somebody right away. And we took 2 or 3 years, and in those years, we asked, who are we? Are we contemporary? Are we traditional? Are we pipe organ? Like that? Or are we guitar? Are we drums or not drums? What are we? And God was so good. I mean, sometimes the questions you ask imprison you, and you need to break out and come at it a new angle. And the new angle was, we're not going to choose. Those questions that I just raised, pipe organ, guitar, drum, those are so secondary when the essence comes down to it. The new question was, is that even the right sound you're asking about? No, that is not the essence. Those are all skin, right? They're not soul. And so the soul, what's the soul? The soul is this people gathered, engaged with God, giving expression in song. Once you decide that's the defining sound of corporate worship here in the singing half of the service, once you decide that's the defining sound, it affects everything. I mean, it affects everything. It affects how you handle the instruments. It affects your lyrics. It affects the simplicity and singability of your tunes. It affects the whole view of performance or non-performance. It affects whether the size of the type on the screen or whether you even use screens. Whether you use hymnals. It affects everything once you say, we're going to sing in this church. We're going to raise up a people who sing. So the pastor and the lead worshiper are one. Their goal. That's our goal. I'm preaching to that end, and you're choosing songs and weaving them together and leading in a certain way to that end. And the demeanor of the people up front help that. The loudness of your microphones help that. Whether you put the drums inside a cage or not helps that. I mean, it's just so many things affect whether or not the people are singing. So that was decisive for us to hear the people singing. I've walked into numerous churches where I can't hear the people at all. Totally. No, this band is so loud, these people could stop singing right now and nobody would know it. That's not good. And so it takes a very wise craftsman who knows, what do you call it, the effect of a room and how it works with sound. Yeah. So got to know that, got to know everything. So, yeah, that was what I said to him, and it's been wonderful.
Let me ask this. This is curious to me because, I mean, the megachurch pastor in America are infamously micromanagers. You're infamously not. So if you're not a micromanager, why is it so important for a senior pastor to be encouraging and exhorting and setting the standard for his congregation that the congregational singing is the important thing?
I wonder if you ask Scott there, who's the president of Desiring God, or Chuck, who worked with me for 17 years, if they would say, I'm not a micromanager.
They both told me that.
Maybe you.
They told me other stuff, but they told me you weren't a micromanager.
Well, I try not to tread where I shouldn't tread.
But the point is, whether you're a micromanager about 0.5% of stuff or 50% of the stuff is irrelevant. The point is, why is it so important for you to interject? Because so many of these guys are washing their hands of the singing in their church, like it's either an emotional trip for somebody else to look after, or it's a substandard thing. It's not that important.
Yeah. Well, I've tried to make the case that it's the goal. It's all important. Since God is all important, the people engaged knowing him rightly and loving him with all their heart, soul, mind, and strength is it is the first and great commandment. So you can't wash your hands of whether those people out there are getting what you say and feeling appropriately what they ought to feel. You can't wash your hands of that. That's the goal of your life. Your people who stand here with the instruments and choose the songs are your deputies. And they must be in sync with you. Now, this is hard because I know senior pastors who are so out of sync with their worship leaders that it's heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking. They can't communicate. And the reason they can't is because the pastor did not, either he came and inherited somebody, which is difficult, or he did not elevate theology and a philosophy of worship based on a theology that this staff has to be unified by. I mean, it was clear to me, I'm not into diversity on this staff at the level of theology. I'm into diversity personality-wise. That's crucial. If everybody were like me, that would not be good. Or if everybody were like Tom Steller, that would not be good. Or like Chuck, that would not be good. Diversity matters. Ethnically, it matters, and personality-wise, it matters, all those things. But theologically, we got to be on the same page. Then you can build together, and my preaching then becomes a means to what they're doing. I have to lay the groundwork and build foundations for why do these deputies do what they do. And if I think the reason probably that I'm not as much of a micromanager as I may feel that I am, is that I lead by teaching. I led on the elder council by teaching. Everything relates to everything if you're a Calvinist. And I tried to show what integrity in life looks like and how the pieces of a service, they have to work theologically and they have to work emotionally. And I felt, the reason I kind of balked when you said you're not a micromanager, I'll give you an example. This is going to be really tricky because I don't know if you do these sorts of things in Ireland, Northern Ireland. If
it's wrong, no.
If this what we just did in singing those songs were my worship service, I would probably go to Chuck when we're done and say, the transition between holy, holy, holy and the mission song didn't work. And he being humble, like he is, might say, what would you do? So I'm into it, right? This is mega, and I would say, that was a remarkable moment at the end of Holy, Holy, Holy. That was a remarkable moment. It needed about 30 seconds of some gifted person weaving that moment into that guitar. That's what it needed. I say things like that as a pastor. And I don't know what
Turn his microphone off.
I don't know what that is, except that I believe very, very few people, it seems to me, feel moments like I do. If a prayer moment, a song moment, a preaching moment, a painful moment, a happy moment. You gotta cherish and handle God-given moments with tremendous wisdom. Both of those moods, the and the end of Holy Holy, are glorious moods. Don't hear me criticizing that song. I love that song. Psalm 67 is one of my favorite. That's a glorious song. Let the nations be.
Next question.
Yeah. Okay.
Leads nicely. Keep going.
Yeah.
Keep going. This is good.
Well, I just lost my train of thought, so that's probably just as well.
Two glorious moods.
Yeah, two glorious moods. And each needs to have integrity, and I feel the integrity of both can be compromised by butting into each other inappropriately. And what I said was a gifted person, and you got to know who they are on your eldership, because a lot of people can't do prayers of praise. A lot of people cannot do prayers of confession. They're just it's just so artificial when they try to do them. But you know, a few people in your church are really gifted. And somebody takes us in the first 10 seconds. They pause, everybody's quiet. And he moves. You are holy. And we are glad you're here. And how we long, oh God, for the nations to know your holiness. And he takes you, about 30 seconds, he takes you toward that next mood. And he can do it. A gifted person can, his voice, his content will take you from that sacred moment and move you toward an exuberant moment seamlessly. So I don't know if that's micromanaging or not, but I preach in a way, I teach in a way to try to help all of us discern the moments God gives us.
I think this is a wonderful point because, as a group, the average member of this group has been with us 10 years. So this is a group that have been together a long time. And we plan things, we review each one of them. And the amount you learn from that collaborative thing is great. But then similarly, as Jonathan Ray and I planned this event, we did 5 meetings, and each of the 5 meetings, the conference became better because of the dialogue and the critique and that kind of thing. And then similarly at the level of pastor and worship leader. That's not true, almost every, we're talking well over 95% of those I know who have written well for the church have been in a dynamic relationship for a large part of their work with a pastor who, whether they do breakfast on Tuesdays, whether they have this chemistry that they work well together. And the chemistry of a pastor and a music guy coming together once a week and being able to actually plan a service, look back and say, what 3 things could we have done better last week? At a later point. This kind of thing is what actually makes services better, because we actually are approaching it in 2 different ways. And a lot of these things, like your point, is a stylistic point. It is candidly not something most Presbyterian churches here would want to do. But for many other churches, it is something that will be wonderful and would have added richness to it. And I think that is the beauty of these relationships. And that's why I hope there are as many pastors and music directors here. And if they're not, I would honestly suggest that all of you, in a very humble way if you're the music guy, and in a very gentle way if you're the pastor, sit down and have a meeting, have a lunch with the pastor or the musician who you work with, and actually begin to say, what did we learn from this? What things can we take away? What can we do better? Because the actual interaction between the two, I think, makes both stronger.
And not just the one-on-one, but a series on the nature of worship. Right. That goes to the heart of the matter for the people. Right. And of course, all your worship leaders are going to be listening to this, and you're going to be talking it over with them. I mean, to have a people who have one mind about what we're about here. What are we doing here? Do we say things like, this is one of my pet peeves. Do we say, should a pastor stand up in front of his people and say, reason there's no enthusiasm in this room right here is because everybody's coming to get, not to give. If you come to give more, there'd be more life in this room. To which I say, baloney. They should come starved for God. Starved for God. And your job is to set a banquet before them. And Chuck's job is to spread a sung banquet before them, so that the starved people who are coming in beat up and hungry and empty, not, full. It'd be great if everybody came full and overflowing, but beating people up because they come empty is not a good idea. We are here to fill people up. So that the people need to be brought into that conversation as well.
It's wonderful. So, I have no idea what time I'm supposed to finish at. Can some now? I have like 3 more questions. Am I finished? Okay, fantastic. Well, John Piper, please. Thank you so much indeed. That was extraordinary.